Chapter 6. I don't know why Dad and Scar warned me about this place, Simba thought, as he started to climb up a steep pile of rocks on the far side of the elephant graveyard. Besides being dirty, it's not even a little scary. I bet they were just teasing me. I bet this is some sort of king's rite of passage or something. Well, I'll show them. Behind him, he could hear Nala muttering to herself. He had been surprised when she'd said they should go home. Usually Nala was all in for an adventure, but the place had gotten her spooked. Or maybe she was just pouting because he had told her she couldn't even get an aardvark to marry her. "Simba!" Nala shouted as he leapt off a particularly steep rock and landed in front of a narrow, dark cave. "Get down! It could be dangerous." "Danger?" Simba repeated, looking over his shoulder. "Ha! I laugh in the face of danger." Turning to look back at the cave, he let out a few more laughs. The sound echoed through the cave, bouncing off the walls and coming back at them. "You hear that, Nala?" he shouted. Nala frowned. "Simba, come on," she pleaded. "You proved how brave you are. The sun is going down, and I'm not going to sit here and—" Simba wasn't even listening. He was too busy laughing into the cave. He let out another series of ha-ha-ha's, only this time the sound that came back wasn't his own. It was the unmistakable and terrifying laugh of a hyena. Before Simba could even turn to run or call out to warn Nala, a huge hyena charged out of the cave. His mouth was open wide, his long, pointy teeth covered in froth and saliva as he saw a fresh meal standing there. Just before he could bite Simba in two, Simba threw himself backward, tumbling down the rocks and landing, with a thud, right next to Nala. As the two cubs watched, hyenas began to emerge from every direction. They came out of holes in the ground, from imperceptible gaps between rocks, and from caves Simba hadn't even noticed. In seconds, the cubs were surrounded. The hyenas' laughter bounced off the jagged rocks, filling the elephant graveyard with a terrible sound. Suddenly, the larger group of hyenas parted, making way for two of their own to walk up to Simba and Nala. One of them could barely keep his tongue in his mouth, and the other was scarred, his fur thin and his eyes hard. The scarred one stepped forward, eyeing the cubs. "Well, look at this," he said. His voice was deep and raspy. "We weren't expecting guests today. Would you two cubs like to stay for dinner?" But it wasn't Simba or Nala who replied. "Yes, great idea," the hyena with the dangling tongue sneered. "You guys have to stay. We don't have much to eat, just some old bones to chew on." "Azizi," the larger hyena said, cutting him off. "I wasn't actually asking them to stay." The hyena looked confused. "But you just said stay," Azizi pointed out. "Why are you lying to them?" Simba shot Nala a look. They knew hyenas were not the brightest creatures, but Azizi was something else. Maybe there was a chance they could escape. If they could outsmart the hyenas, Simba figured they might just be okay. But then the other hyena snarled, baring his fangs. He was clearly growing tired of his companion's stupidity. "Because they are dinner," he said. "Understand?" Azizi's eyes grew wide as he looked back and forth between the cubs. Then, slowly, he began to nod. "Oh, I get it," he finally said. "That makes sense. But just to be clear, are they staying?" "We are eating them," the other hyena shouted, completely losing his cool. "Right now." Simba and Nala began to inch backward as both hyenas turned toward them, mouths open. Simba gulped. He might have been wrong to think they could get out of this. They were trapped, and there was no way they could escape. "Nobody touches them." At the sound of the commanding voice, the hyenas froze. Looking up, Simba watched as a large female hyena slowly emerged from a cave. Unlike the bumbling duo in front of them, this hyena was strong, her coat clean and her eyes clear. She walked with her head up, and as she passed, the other hyenas bowed and backed away, making way for their queen. Approaching the cubs, the large hyena looked down at them, studying them intently. Then a large grin broke over her spotted face. "Now, this is a meal I've waited my whole life for," she said, letting out a cackle. What an unexpected treat, to eat the son of a king. Simba swallowed nervously. This had to be Shenzi, the leader of the hyenas. He had heard of her, and clearly she knew who he was. Maybe that was a good thing? Maybe he could use it to his advantage. After all, if she was queen of the hyenas, perhaps there was some unspoken rule of respect for other royalty. Either way, he couldn't just stand there. Stepping in front of Nala, Simba puffed up his chest. "I am the future king," he said as loudly and bravely as he could, "which means you can't do anything to me." "He's telling me what to do," Shenzi sneered, his father's strength flickering inside. "I wonder how all that bravery will taste." She took a step closer, her lips pulling back into a snarl as she bared her teeth. Simba backed up, but she kept coming. He felt her breath on his cheek and saw the drool dripping from her fangs. He closed his eyes. "Let them go, Shenzi." Simba's eyes popped open. He had never in his life been happier to hear the sound of Zazu's voice. Looking up, he watched as the hornbill swooped down and landed in front of him and Nala. Spreading his wings to their full width, Zazu blocked the cubs from Shenzi. "They made a mistake, a horrible mistake," he went on. "But if you do this, you'll start a war with Mufasa." "Hyenas and lions have been at war since the beginning of time," Shenzi said, sounding unimpressed by Zazu's threat. "But Mufasa's bloodline will end here." Moving forward, Shenzi signaled to the others, and they too began to move. Zazu could give all the warnings he wanted. They were going to kill Simba, even if it meant war. Lowering his wings, Zazu turned his head. "Run!" he shouted to Simba and Nala. Simba didn't have to be told twice. Spinning on his back paws, he took off, with Nala right behind him. Simba ran as fast and hard as he could. His heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled up and over rocks, trying to outrun the hyenas. He could hear Nala right behind him, her breath hitching as she, too, ran for her life. He hadn't meant for things to turn out like this. He had just wanted to see what the elephant graveyard looked like, and maybe have a story to tell his friends. He hadn't meant to put them in danger, and he definitely hadn't meant to become a hyena's dinner. If they made it out of here, he was going to be in big, big trouble. The thought spurred him on, and his tiny paws moved faster. Glancing around, he frantically searched for a place to hide or a way to escape. But this was the hyena's home. There was nowhere to hide. Spotting a hole up ahead, Simba raced toward it. It wasn't the best option, but it had to be better than running out in the open. "In here!" he shouted over his shoulder to Nala just before he plunged headfirst into the opening. Inside it was dark, and the smell of hyena was overwhelming. Simba's nose crinkled in disgust as he leapt over something sticky, but he kept going, running deeper into the dark. Occasionally, other holes would open up to the side or above, the whole place a network of interlocking tunnels and dens. As they ran, they could hear the hyenas' eerie laughter bouncing through the tunnels. The hyenas' heads shot down from smaller openings above as they tried to grab the cubs, each time just barely missing them. Coming around a corner, Simba and Nala skidded to a stop. Right in front of them was a baby hyena. For a long moment, cubs and hyena just looked at one another, not sure who was more surprised, the cubs stumbling on the baby hyena, or the hyena baby getting unexpected visitors. The little hyena's eyes were wide as it cocked its head. Simba was just about to smile at the kind of cute little guy when, suddenly, the baby bared its teeth. Simba and Nala jumped back and screamed as they realized, cute or not, the baby wanted a snack, too. Once more, they began to race through the tunnels, now with the baby hyena close behind. Simba's head swiveled side to side as he desperately searched for a way up and out of the maze of tunnels. But everywhere he looked, he was met with more dens. The hyena's home was impossible to escape. Just as he was about to give up, he heard Nala shout. Looking ahead, he saw a beam of light. A way out. With a burst of speed, he and Nala raced toward the light and shot out into the fading sun of late afternoon. Not stopping, they ran full speed away from the dens and toward the steep hill at the far side of the elephant graveyard. Behind them, they could hear the hyenas closing in. Reaching the hill, Simba began to climb, but his paws couldn't get a grip on the steep and slick rock, and he slid back down. Beside him, Nala's attempts were just as futile. They couldn't get out the same way they had come in. They were trapped. Hearing the terrible and now frighteningly close sound of hyena laughter, Simba slowly turned around. Then he gulped. Not only were they trapped, but they were trapped and facing a whole pack of hungry hyenas. Simba turned and looked over at Nala. His friend was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. He had never seen her so scared, and it made him even more frightened. He took a deep breath. This was all his fault. He had gotten them into this mess. He had to be the one to get them out, or at least he had to try. Stepping in front of Nala, he planted his paws and puffed up his chest. Then, tilting back his head, he roared. Or rather, he tried to roar. But he was a cub, and his roar was not very loud. It barely sounded over the hyenas' heavy breathing. The hyenas began to laugh hysterically. Some grabbed their bellies and fell to the ground, while others just howled and howled. Kamari, the tougher and meaner of Shenzi's two minions, pointed at Simba and, still laughing, shouted, "Did you hear that? The future king!" Overcome with laughter, he fell to the ground. "Our enemy," Azizi said, also laughing. "I'm so scared. Do it again." Simba growled under his breath. They were making fun of him. Fine. They thought he was just a little lion cub with a silly roar. Well, he would show them. Opening his mouth, he once more let out a roar. Only this time, the roar wasn't tiny. It was huge. It shook the ridge and every hyena to the core. Simba's mouth snapped shut as he realized exactly who had just roared. Turning, he had only a moment to see his father standing on top of the ridge before the king roared again and charged. In a flash of red and gold, Mufasa raced down the steep side of the hill and right into the throng of hyenas. His teeth snapped and his claws flashed as he threw aside the hyenas, scattering the yipping beasts in a cloud of dust. Simba watched open-mouthed as his father single-handedly put the hyenas in their place. He had never seen anything like it. As the other hyenas started to flee, Shenzi stepped forward. Her lips curled back, revealing her fangs as she tried to stare down Mufasa. But the king didn't flinch. Snarling, he lifted a paw, extended his claws, and swiped. The blow hit Shenzi right on the leg, sending her flying backward. She landed with a thud. Mufasa stalked forward, sending Shenzi scrambling back until she was cornered against a wall. There was no place to run. Mufasa stared down at the queen of the hyenas, his eyes boring into her with hatred. "If you ever come near my son again," he said threateningly. Shenzi shook her head. "No, Mufasa," she said weakly. "Never, never again." "You've been warned, Shenzi," Mufasa said. Then he turned and looked at the remaining hyenas clustered together. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Immediately, they began to slink away, disappearing down their holes and into their caves. Shenzi was the last to go. Getting up, she kept her head down as she limped up the rocks and into her own cave. As the dust settled, Mufasa turned and looked at Simba. Simba shrank down, his eyes filling with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said softly. In response, Mufasa turned his back on Simba. "Let's go home," he said, staring straight ahead. Hanging his head, Simba began to follow his father back toward the safety of the Pride Lands. Beside him, Nala tried to offer comfort, but he ignored her. He didn't deserve it. Not now. He had disappointed his father, and that scared him more than facing a pack of hyenas.